The Louisville police officer's hand hovered over his holstered weapon as he backed me against my own kitchen counter, his eyes scanning me like I was some kind of threat. My grandbabies, Tyler and Maya, pressed against the far wall by the living room doorway, their tear-streaked faces frozen in confusion and fear. Fear of me, their own grandmother. Hey there, beautiful souls. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my story today. I am curious, what part of the world are you tuning in from? Drop your city in the comments below. All right, let us dive into what happened to me. The afternoon had started ordinary enough. I'd been pulling sweet potato pies from the oven, the cinnamon and nutmeg scent filling my modest ranch house, when my son Derek burst through my front door without knocking. His face was flushed, sweat beading on his temples despite the cool October air. He grabbed both children by their wrists and yanked them toward the exit. My hands, still clutching oven mitts, dropped to my sides as I watched my 8-year-old grandson stumble over the threshold. Maya's small voice had called out for me, but Derek's grip tightened on her shoulder, steering her forcefully toward his SUV parked crookedly in my driveway, engine still running. I'd followed them outside, my slippers crunching against fallen leaves. The neighbors across the street paused their yard work, rakes suspended midair as they watched the scene unfold. Derek, what in God's name? Stay away from them, he'd said, positioning his body between me and the children. The words struck harder than any physical blow. I reached past him anyway, my fingers brushing Maya's braided hair, before Derek swatted my hand away. The force wasn't violent, but the intention was clear. He shoved the kids into the back seat, fumbling with the child locks to trap them inside. That's when I'd grabbed his arm. My 64-year-old muscles, still strong from years of nursing work, pulled him back toward me with enough force to make him stumble on the concrete. His elbow knocked against the side mirror, and something in his expression shifted from panic to calculation. He'd pulled out his phone, fingers jabbing at the screen while keeping his eyes locked on mine. 15 minutes later, 2 squad cars had arrived. The officers separated us immediately, one taking Derek to the driveway, while another guided me back inside. I'd tried to explain about the pies, about our planned afternoon together, about Derek's increasingly erratic behavior over the past 6 months. But my voice sounded thin, desperate even to my own ears. The younger officer positioned himself between me and my front door, notepad already out. His hand rested near his belt, not on his weapon, but close enough that the gesture made my throat tighten. Through the window behind him, I could see Derek gesturing wildly at his partner, his mouth moving rapidly while he pointed at my house, at me, at his SUV, where the children's faces pressed against the tinted windows. I pressed my palms flat against my kitchen counter, feeling the cool granite beneath my fingertips. The pies sat there still, crusts golden and perfect, steam no longer rising from the latticed tops. My hands had shaped that dough this morning at 5 a.m., when the world felt manageable and my grandchildren's laughter was still a possibility for today. Ma'am, I need you to walk me through what happened. The officer's voice carried that careful neutrality they must teach in training. His eyes scanned my living room, lingering on the family photos covering the mantel, then dropping to catalog the throw pillows, the folded Afghan, the reading glasses beside my Bible. I opened my mouth, but my jaw trembled. I bit down hard, forcing my teeth together until the shaking stopped. My son brought my grandchildren over. We had plans. He became agitated and tried to leave with them. I stopped him. Stopped him how? The question hung there while I watched Derek through the window. He'd pulled up his sleeve, showing something to the other officer. My stomach dropped. The place where I'd grabbed his arm. Even from here, I could see him wincing theatrically, cradling his elbow. I touched his arm. He was throwing the children into his car and my voice cracked. I swallowed it down, straightened my spine the way I used to before walking into a patient's room with bad news. I needed him to slow down, to talk to me. The officer wrote something down. His pen scratched across the paper, each stroke feeling like an indictment. Outside, Derek's voice rose loud enough to penetrate the walls. I caught fragments. Unstable, and medication, and years of this. My fingers found the edge of my cardigan, working the fabric between my thumb and forefinger. I'd knitted this sweater 2 winters ago, the same winter Marcus had been born. Before Derek had married that woman. Before everything had shifted into this nightmare I couldn't seem to wake from. Has there been any previous conflict between you and your son? The diplomatic phrasing almost made me laugh. Conflict. As if that word could encompass the past year of canceled visits, unanswered calls, the way Derek flinched now when I reached for him. As if it could explain the confusion in Maya's eyes when she'd asked me last month why Daddy said she couldn't sleep over anymore. He's been distant. The words felt inadequate, but safer than the truth. Saying out loud that my own son had turned against me would make it real in a way I wasn't ready to face. Through the window, Derek's partner headed toward his car, speaking into his radio. The younger officer in my kitchen shifted his weight, and I caught the movement of his hand rising toward his shoulder mic. Ma'am, your son claims you've been experiencing some confusion lately. Memory issues. He says you've made accusations about his wife that aren't true. Heat flooded my face, rushing up from my chest until my ears burned. My hands clenched into fists against the counter, knuckles pressing white against my brown skin. I forced them open, forced my breathing to steady, forced myself not to explode the way every cell in my body demanded. I have no memory issues. Each word came out measured, controlled. I worked as an ER nurse for 40 years. I remember everything. The younger officer's expression shifted, mouth tightening at one corner. He glanced toward the window where his partner stood talking into his radio, then back at me. His hand dropped from his shoulder mic, hovering instead near the notepad clipped to his belt. I pushed away from the counter, needing to move, needing the blood to flow somewhere besides my burning face. My legs carried me to the sink, where the breakfast dishes still sat in sudsy water. The ceramic mug handle felt solid under my fingers as I lifted it, scrubbing at phantom stains that had already washed away. Your son mentioned a specific incident? Something about his wife and medication? The mug slipped, clattering against the sink's metal bottom. Water splashed up, darkening the front of my cardigan. I gripped the edge of the counter again, digging my short nails into the laminate until they bent backward. That woman switched my blood pressure pills. The words came out flat, dead. I turned to face him fully, water dripping from my hands onto the linoleum. I've been taking the same medication for 15 years. Same bottle, same pharmacy, same everything. Then suddenly I'm dizzy, nauseous, can't keep my balance. I checked the bottle. Different pills inside. The officer's pen moved across his notepad now, making small scratching sounds that seemed too loud in my kitchen. His face remained carefully neutral, but I saw the slight elevation of his eyebrows, the way his jaw shifted as he bit the inside of his cheek. Did you have the pills tested? Bring them to your pharmacist? My throat constricted. The bottle had vanished from my bathroom cabinet 2 days after I'd confronted Derek about it. When I'd called him, demanding to know where it was, he'd used that new voice, the patient, concerned one that made me want to scream. She took them. I heard how it sounded, heard the edge of hysteria creeping into my voice despite my best efforts. She came over with the kids, said she needed to use the bathroom. When I checked later, the bottle was gone. The scratching pen stopped. The officer looked up at me, and I saw it there in his eyes. The thing I'd been dreading. Not belief, not even skepticism. Something worse. Pity. The kind of pity people reserve for the elderly, the confused, the losing their grip. My stomach dropped away. The kitchen tilted slightly, or maybe that was just the residual dizziness from whatever had been in those pills. I reached for the counter again, steadying myself, forcing my spine straight. "Ma'am, I have to ask, have you been evaluated by a doctor recently? Had any tests done?" The question landed like a physical blow. My breath caught, held trapped in my chest until my ribs ached. I watched him watching me, this young officer with his careful questions and his pitying eyes, and felt something crack inside my carefully maintained composure. My phone buzzed on the counter where I'd left it. The screen lit up with a text preview from my daughter-in-law's number. The first line was visible. "The kids are asking about you. Maybe it's time to—" I snatched the phone, thumbs smashing the power button until the screen went dark. My hands shook so badly the phone nearly slipped free. I shoved it into my cardigan pocket, felt it there like a hot coal against my hip. "I'm 64 years old." My voice came out harder now, steadier. I raised 2 sons by myself after my husband died. Put them both through college, working double shifts at the hospital. I managed emergency rooms, made split-second decisions that saved lives, supervised teams of doctors and nurses for 2 decades. My mind is sound. The officer's radio crackled to life. Static, then Derek's partner's voice. "We got a statement from the son. Says she called his house 17 times yesterday. Left messages about the wife trying to poison her." My face went hot again, but this time something cold followed, spreading down through my chest into my gut. 17 calls. Had it been that many? I remembered calling. Yes. Remembered the desperation to make Derek listen, to make him see what was happening. But 17. The younger officer's eyes found mine. His hand moved back toward his shoulder mic, and I knew what was coming, could feel it gathering in the air like a summer storm. My feet carried me backward before my mind caught up with the motion. 3 steps toward the kitchen island, my hip colliding with the corner hard enough to send a jolt of pain through my pelvis. The officers both straightened, their bodies tensing like coiled springs. "Ma'am, we need you to stay calm." The older one's hand hovered near his belt, fingers flexing. I gripped the granite countertop behind me, felt the cool stone dig into my palms. My medication bottles stood in a neat row near the sink. Blood pressure pills, the aspirin, the vitamin D my doctor insisted I needed. Everything organized, everything where it belonged. Evidence of a mind that functioned, that maintained order and routine. I'm calm. The words scraped out of my throat. I'm perfectly calm. But my chest was heaving, pulling air in gasps that made my ribs ache. The kitchen tilted slightly, just a few degrees, then righted itself. I blinked hard, forced my breathing to slow. Through the window over the sink, I could see Derek's SUV still parked at the curb. He hadn't left. He was out there right now, probably talking to his partner, building his case brick by brick. The younger officer moved sideways, cutting off my path to the hallway. His boots squeaked against my freshly mopped floor. I'd cleaned yesterday morning, or had it been this morning? The Lysol smell still hung faint in the air, mingling with the coffee I'd brewed before dawn. "Your son mentioned some incidents?" The older officer pulled a small notebook from his chest pocket, flipped it open with practiced efficiency. Breaking into his house 3 weeks ago? The blood rushed to my head so fast I saw spots. I didn't break in. I used my key, the emergency key Derek gave me when they bought the house. Their smoke detector was beeping. I heard it from the driveway when I stopped by to drop off the children's birthday presents. My voice climbed higher with each word. I heard it happening, couldn't stop it. The younger officer's hand definitely moved to his belt now, fingers brushing something there. Not his gun, something else. The panic button on his radio, maybe. Or pepper spray. I forced my hands to release the countertop. Held them up, palms out, fingers spread wide to show I held nothing. My wedding ring caught the light streaming through the window, the gold band I'd worn for 43 years, through my husband's illness and death, through raising my boys alone. The smoke detector had a dead battery. I lowered my voice, made it steady through sheer force of will. There were dishes in the sink with food dried on them, fruit flies everywhere. The living room looked like a tornado hit it. My grandbabies, Amara and Caleb, they deserved better than that chaos. The older officer wrote something in his notebook. His pen scratched across the paper, each stroke feeling like a judgment being recorded. Did you have permission to enter the residence that day? I told you. I had a key. That's not what I asked. My jaw clenched so hard my molars ground together. Through the window, I saw Derek climb out of his SUV. He stood on the sidewalk, phone pressed to his ear, free hand gesturing as he talked. His face was red even from this distance. My boy, my firstborn, who I'd rocked through colic and midnight fevers, who I'd taught to read, to ride a bike, to stand up for himself when bigger kids pushed him around at school. He'd grown into a stranger who called the police on his own mother. A car door slammed outside. Derek's voice carried through the walls, muffled but sharp with agitation. The officers' radios crackled simultaneously. More static then. Subject's wife is en route. ETA 2 minutes. My stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. Madison, coming here, into my house. I pushed away from the counter, moved toward the officers. Both of them immediately stepped back, hands rising in mirror images of my earlier gesture. The space between us felt electric, charged with potential violence that nobody wanted, but everyone anticipated. She can't come in here. My voice broke on the last word. This is my home. You can't let her. Ma'am, you need to sit down. The younger officer's tone had changed, lost its careful politeness. Right now. But I couldn't sit, couldn't stay still. My feet carried me toward the front window, needing to see, needing to know if it was really happening. The older officer moved with me, shadowing my steps, staying close enough to grab me if I bolted. Through the sheer curtains, I watched a silver Honda pull up behind Derek's SUV. The driver's door opened. Madison stepped out wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, visible even from here. She looked like a victim, like someone people would believe, would protect. My hands curled into fists at my sides. My fingernails bit into my palms as Madison crossed the lawn. Derek moved toward her, his body language protective, possessive. He touched her elbow, leaned close, his mouth moving rapidly. Her eyes widened. She looked at the house, at the patrol car in my driveway, and her hand flew to her mouth. The performance was flawless. Behind me, the older officer spoke into his radio, low and controlled. His partner shifted position, placing himself between me and the front door. The younger one's boots squeaked on my linoleum. The sound scraped against my eardrums like nails on a chalkboard. Step away from the window, please. I didn't move, couldn't tear my eyes from the scene unfolding on my front lawn. Madison's shoulders started shaking. Derek pulled her against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head. His other hand gestured animatedly toward the house, toward me. The street curtains across the road twitched. Mrs. Chen from next door had appeared on her porch, arms crossed, watching. "Ma'am!" The officer's voice hardened. "Away from the window! Now!" The front door opened without warning. I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs. Derek filled the doorway, his frame blocking most of the sunlight. Madison stood just behind him, her face pale, eyes red-rimmed and glistening. "You need to arrest her." Derek's voice thundered through my kitchen. "She came to my kids' school. She tried to take Emma from the parking lot." The air left my lungs in a rush. "That's a lie." "4 parents saw you." Madison's voice trembled, perfectly calibrated to sound terrified and brave simultaneously. "The principal called us. Security footage shows everything." My legs went weak. I gripped the counter edge to stay upright. The laminate felt cold and slick under my sweating palms. "I haven't been to any school. I haven't left this house in 3 days." Derek took a step inside. The older officer moved immediately, positioning himself between us, one hand raised toward my son. "Sir, you need to stay outside. This is an active scene." "Active scene?" Derek's laugh was sharp, bitter. "She's the active threat. My mother is stalking my family." The younger officer had his phone out now, typing rapidly. His face remained neutral, but his jaw muscles worked beneath his skin. Radio chatter filled the silence. Dispatch requesting backup. Something about reviewing footage. The words jumbled together in my head, incomprehensible. Madison stepped around Derek, her movements small and hesitant. She clutched a phone in her hand, screen illuminated. "I have the pictures. The school sent them to all the parents. There's a woman matching her description." She thrust the phone toward the older officer. He took it, studied the screen, his expression unreadable. My pulse pounded in my temples. The officer looked at me, then back at the phone, then at me again. His eyes narrowed slightly. "This woman is wearing a red jacket and sunglasses." His voice was carefully neutral. "Ma'am, do you own a red jacket?" "Half the women in this city own red jackets." My voice came out stronger than I felt. "Show me the picture." The officer hesitated. Derek lunged forward again, his face flushed dark crimson. "You don't get to make demands! You don't get to—" "Derek, please." Madison touched his arm, the dutiful wife trying to calm her agitated husband. "Let them handle it." But Derek was beyond calming. He shoved past the older officer with surprising force, closing the distance between us in 3 strides. His hand shot out, grabbed my shoulder, fingers digging into the soft flesh above my collarbone. Pain exploded bright and hot through my upper body. "You stay away from my children!" Spittle flew from his lips, landing on my cheek. I twisted, trying to break free. His grip tightened. The kitchen tilted sideways. Both officers were shouting now, moving fast, their bodies colliding with Derek's. Hands everywhere, pulling, separating. I stumbled backward, my hip cracking against the counter's sharp corner. More pain, different location, just as intense. The younger officer had Derek's arm wrenched behind his back. Derek's face pressed against my refrigerator, squashing his features. The magnets, Emma's school photos, Nathan's crayon drawings, scattered across the floor like autumn leaves. Madison screamed something incomprehensible, her voice high and panicked. My shoulder throbbed where Derek had grabbed me. I touched it gingerly, felt the heat radiating through my shirt. Tomorrow there would be bruises, dark purple proof shaped like my son's fingers. The older officer's radio crackled. Static filled my kitchen, harsh and mechanical. Through the noise, a female dispatcher's voice cut sharp. "Unit 12, we need confirmation on transport." "Affirmative." The officer's response was clipped, professional. He kept his body angled between Derek and me, one hand still resting on the weapon at his hip. Derek's breathing came in ragged gulps against the refrigerator. The younger officer maintained pressure on his arm, keeping him pinned. A magnet fell late, bouncing twice before settling near my foot. Nathan's gap-toothed smile stared up at me from the photograph, taken last Christmas when everything was different. I pressed my back against the counter, needing the solid support. My hip screamed where it had connected with the corner. The pain radiated down my leg, made standing difficult. I shifted my weight, testing, and my knee buckled slightly. 64-year-old bones didn't absorb impact the way younger ones did. Madison moved toward Derek, her arms outstretched. "Please, he didn't mean it. He's just protecting his family." The older officer stepped sideways, blocking her path. "Ma'am, you need to stay back." She stopped, her hands falling to her sides. Her fingers twisted together, knuckles whitening. Behind her careful makeup, I could see the woman she'd been before Derek. Softer, less certain. That woman had disappeared years ago, replaced by this polished shell who always said the right things, wore the right clothes, kept the right opinions. The younger officer pulled Derek away from the refrigerator. His cheek bore a red impression from the metal surface. They maneuvered him toward the back door, moving in synchronized steps like dancers who'd performed this routine countless times. Derek's feet dragged, his dress shoes squeaking against my linoleum. "Mom?" The word exploded from him, desperate and furious. "Mom, tell them!" I looked at my son. Really looked at him. His hair was graying at the temples, just like his father's had. The lines around his mouth had deepened since I'd last seen him up close, 3 weeks ago at Emma's soccer game, where he'd literally turned his back when I approached. His eyes, though. Those were still the eyes of the boy who'd crawled into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd held my hand crossing streets, who'd cried when his goldfish died. But they were also the eyes of a man who'd grabbed his elderly mother hard enough to leave bruises. I said nothing. Derek's face contorted. "You crazy bitch! You drove me to this! You drove us all—" The younger officer yanked him through the doorway. The screen door slammed, its spring screeching. Through the window, I watched them walk Derek across my backyard, past the garden bed where I'd planted tomatoes last month. The plants had grown tall, their green stems bending under the weight of ripening fruit. I'd planned to share the harvest with Emma and Nathan, make sauce together like I used to do with Derek when he was small. Madison remained frozen in my kitchen, her perfect posture finally crumbling. Her shoulders curved inward. She wrapped her arms around herself, fingernails digging into the expensive fabric of her sleeves. The older officer's radio crackled again. He adjusted the volume, then turned to me. "Mrs. Mason, I need to ask you some questions about the incident with your granddaughter." My shoulder pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I touched it again, pressing gently. The pain was immediate, sharp. Through my shirt, I could feel the beginning of swelling. By tonight, the bruises would be spectacular. Deep purple, maybe black at the center, where Derek's thumb had dug in. "I didn't hurt her." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "No one's saying you did." He pulled out a small notebook, flipped it open. "But there's been a report filed. We need to understand what happened. Madison made a sound, halfway between a laugh and a sob. She grabbed Emma at the school. She wasn't supposed to be there. I hugged my granddaughter. Each word felt heavy, precise. That's not a crime. The school has explicit instructions. Madison's voice gained strength, finding familiar ground. You're not authorized for pickup. You're not on the approved list. Emma's teacher said you appeared agitated, that you wouldn't listen when she tried to explain. I wanted to see my grandchildren. My hip throbbed. I shifted again, leaning more heavily against the counter. That's all I wanted. The officer wrote something down. His pen scratched against paper, each stroke deliberate. Outside, a car door slammed. Engine noise followed, growing fainter as the police vehicle carried Derek away from my house, away from me. Madison pulled out her phone. Her thumbs flew across the screen, typing frantically, probably texting her lawyer, her mother, her prayer group. Building her case, brick by careful brick. My legs gave out without warning. The tile floor rushed up to meet my knees, the impact sending a shockwave through my joints. I caught myself with my palms, the linoleum cold and gritty against my skin. A cabinet handle dug into my shoulder blade. Oh, God. Madison's shoes appeared in my vision. Expensive flats, cream-colored, spotless. They stepped back quickly. She's doing it again. She's trying to manipulate. I need to call an ambulance, ma'am. The officer's boots shifted, weight redistributing. His radio crackled at his hip. No. I forced the word out, pushed myself up onto my hands. The kitchen swam, tilted sideways. Bile burned the back of my throat. Just dizzy. But I wasn't just dizzy. My right arm wasn't responding correctly, the fingers tingling like I'd slept on them wrong. I flexed them, watched them move sluggishly, disconnected from intention. The officer crouched beside me. His hand hovered near my elbow, not quite touching. How long since you've eaten? I couldn't remember. Yesterday? The day before? The refrigerator hummed behind me, probably empty except for expired milk and wilted lettuce. I'd stopped bothering with groceries after Derek changed the locks on his house, after the restraining order paperwork arrived. Madison made another call, her voice bright and false. Hi, yes, we're at the address. Yes, she's becoming uncooperative. I think we need... Yes, that would be helpful. I managed to sit back against the cabinet, my spine pressing into the corner where two counters met. The bruise on my hip screamed. Through the window above the sink, I could see Mrs. Chen next door watering her roses, her face carefully averted. She'd stopped waving 3 weeks ago, after Derek had stood on my porch and shouted about delusions and medication and danger. The officer stood, spoke quietly into his radio. Words filtered through the roaring in my ears. Welfare check, possible medical emergency, family disputes. He was building a file, documenting everything. Every stumble, every moment of weakness would go into the record Derek was constructing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with my left hand since my right still wasn't cooperating properly. 17 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. 3 voicemails. I pressed play, held the phone to my ear. Mrs. Mason, this is Principal Hartley from Riverside Elementary. We need to discuss your visit to our campus today. District policy requires... Delete. The next message started immediately. A woman's voice, younger, uncertain. Grandma, it's Emma. Mommy doesn't know I'm calling. I found your number in Daddy's phone. Are you really sick? Daddy says you have a disease in your brain that makes you forget things and get confused. He says we can't see you until you get better, but I miss... The message cut off abruptly, a fumbling sound, Then Madison's voice sharp in the background. My chest constricted, ribs tightening around my lungs. Emma had sounded scared. Of me? For me? I couldn't tell. Who was that? Madison moved closer, her shadow falling across my lap. My granddaughter. I looked up at her, at this woman who'd entered my family 5 years ago, and somehow convinced my son I was dangerous. Apparently, she doesn't think I'm crazy. She's 7 years old. Madison's mouth formed a thin line. She doesn't understand what's happening. Derek has been protecting them from your episodes. Episodes? The word tasted like ash. Is that what we're calling them now? Another vehicle pulled into my driveway, tires crunching on gravel. Through the window, I watched a white van park behind the police car. County Mental Health Services, the lettering on the side read. 2 people emerged, a man carrying a clipboard and a woman with a medical bag. The officer opened my front door, let them in. Their shoes tracked dirt across my clean entryway, dark prints marking the path to my kitchen. The woman knelt beside me, pulled out a blood pressure cuff. She wrapped it around my arm without asking permission, pumped it tight. Can you tell me your name? Her voice was professionally gentle, the kind of tone used with children and dementia patients. Jocelyn Mason. I'm 64 years old. Today is Thursday, May 18th. The president is... I reeled off the facts automatically, the competency test I'd learned after the first time Derek had called wellness checks on me. Good. She watched the pressure gauge, frowned slightly. Your BP is elevated. Are you on any medications? Blood pressure medication. I haven't filled the prescription in 2 weeks. Why not? The man with the clipboard moved closer, pen poised. Because my insurance was denied. Because Derek convinced my doctor I was non-compliant. Because every system was failing me simultaneously. But I said none of this. Madison's phone rang. She answered immediately, her voice dropping to a whisper. Yes, she's here. Both of them are here. I think they're going to recommend. Yes. Yes, I'll wait. The woman from Mental Health Services closed her bag with a decisive snap. She exchanged glances with her partner, the man with the clipboard who had been scribbling notes throughout the examination. He nodded once, made a final notation with sharp, deliberate strokes. My pulse hammered in my ears. The blood pressure cuff still constricted my arm, forgotten by the woman who now stood and moved toward the officer. They formed a tight cluster near my refrigerator, voices low but urgent. Madison stayed on her phone by the window, her back rigid, shoulders hunched forward as if protecting herself from something. I pulled off the cuff myself, let it drop to the floor. The medical bag sat open on my counter, filled with restraints and sedatives visible through the unzipped compartment. Leather straps, syringes, the tools of involuntary commitment. The floorboards creaked as I stood. Every joint protested, my knees stiff from sitting too long on cold tile. The man turned at the sound, his hand rising in a placating gesture. Mrs. Mason, we need you to remain. I moved, not toward them, but away, backing through the kitchen doorway into the hall. The officer's hand went to his belt, fingers hovering over his radio. The woman stepped forward, her professional mask slipping to reveal something harder underneath. If you run, this gets more difficult for everyone. My bedroom was 6 steps behind me. The door stood open, and beyond it, the window I'd left cracked for fresh air that morning. Second story, but there was a trellis. There was the porch roof. There were options that didn't involve restraints and psychiatric holds. Madison ended her call. Dad says to do whatever it takes. The words landed like a physical blow. Whatever it takes. The permission Derek had granted to strangers in my home. The authorization to use force if necessary. My own son, weaponizing the mental health system against me. I bolted. The hallway blurred past. Behind me, chairs scraped against kitchen tile, heavy footsteps pounding. The officer moved faster than expected, his bulk surprising as he closed the distance. His hand caught my shoulder, spun me around. I twisted hard, felt fabric tear as my blouse ripped free from his grip. The bedroom. I crashed through the doorway, slammed it shut. No lock. Derek had removed all the interior locks after the incident last year, when I'd barricaded myself against another welfare check. My dresser sat against the wall, heavy oak that had belonged to my mother. I threw my weight against it, muscles screaming as I shoved it toward the door. The first impact came before I'd moved it halfway. The door burst inward, cracking against the dresser's edge. The officer's shoulder appeared in the gap, forcing it wider. Wood splintered. The dresser scraped across hardwood, my feet sliding as I pushed back with everything I had. "Mrs. Mason, stop resisting!" The woman squeezed through the opening, her smaller frame slipping past the officer's bulk. She had a syringe now, uncapped, the needle catching light from my bedroom window. Clear liquid gleamed at the tip. I released the dresser, dove sideways toward the bed. My hip caught the corner of the nightstand, pain flaring bright and hot. The lamp crashed to the floor, bulb shattering. I scrambled across the mattress, sheets tangling around my legs. The window was so close, fresh air pouring through the screen. Hands grabbed my ankles. The medical woman, her grip iron strong despite her small size. She pulled, dragged me backward across the bed. I kicked out, felt my heel connect with something solid. She grunted but didn't let go. The officer climbed over the dresser, adding his weight to hers. Together they pinned me, forcing me flat against the mattress. My face pressed into the quilt my grandmother had made, the one I'd slept under for 40 years. The fabric smelled like lavender detergent and home. The needle's sting barely registered against the larger pain of my body being controlled, manipulated, restrained. Cold spread from the injection site, creeping up my arm like ice water in my veins. The woman's voice came from somewhere above me, muffled and distant. "It's just a mild sedative, to keep you calm during transport." Transport. The word echoed in my dimming consciousness. They were taking me. Derek had won. My grandchildren would grow up believing their grandmother was dangerous, unstable. Someone to fear rather than love. The narrative he'd constructed would become truth, reinforced by official documents and medical holds. My fingers clawed at the quilt, trying to hold on to something solid as the room tilted sideways. Madison appeared in the doorway, her face pale and streaked with tears. She covered her mouth with both hands, turned away. The medication pulled me down into cotton-thick darkness. My last clear thought, a prayer that someone, anyone, would question the easy story they'd been told. Story block 910. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their harsh white glare burning through my closed eyelids. I turned my head against thin institutional fabric, rough and overstarched against my cheek. My mouth tasted like copper and chemicals. The room swam into focus slowly. Beige walls, a metal bed frame bolted to the floor, an observation window with safety glass reinforced by wire mesh. I pushed myself upright, muscles screaming from yesterday's struggle. My wrists bore deep purple bruises in the shape of restraining hands. The cotton hospital gown hung loose on my frame, exposing the IV port they'd installed while I was unconscious. A clear bag dripped something into my veins, the rhythm steady as a metronome counting down my imprisonment. Footsteps approached in the hallway. I stood on unsteady legs, gripping the bedrail for support. The door opened with a pneumatic hiss. A man in his 40s entered, clipboard pressed against his chest like armor. His badge identified him as psychiatric staff, though I didn't bother reading the name. "Mrs. Mason, please sit. We need to discuss your treatment plan." I remained standing, feet planted wide for balance. He gestured toward the bed with visible irritation, then consulted his clipboard. The pages were filled with Derek's lies, I knew. Documented delusions. Paranoid episodes. Violent outbursts against family members who only wanted to help. "Your son has provided extensive history suggesting progressive cognitive decline." "My son wants my house." The words came out steady, clear. "Check the property records. He transferred the deed to his name 3 weeks ago, using a power of attorney I never signed." The man's pen paused mid-notation. His eyes flicked up, meeting mine for the first time since entering. I stepped closer, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. Nothing threatening. Nothing they could use against me. "I have documentation. Bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals. Emails to my attorney that Derek intercepted. My neighbor witnessed him changing the locks while I was at my book club." I pointed to the plastic bag containing my personal effects on the counter. "My phone has recordings. He didn't know about the backup app that sends files directly to cloud storage. Every conversation where he discussed selling the property before I became inconvenient." The doctor set down his clipboard, crossed his arms. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. "These are serious allegations. So is involuntary commitment based on falsified reports." He moved to the counter, unzipped the property bag. My phone emerged, screen cracked from when the officer had knocked it from my hand. He powered it on, and I recited the passcode. His thumb scrolled through files while I stood motionless, barely breathing. The evidence was there. I'd been building the case for months, ever since Derek's visits became more frequent, his questions about my will more pointed. Minutes passed. The doctor's expression shifted from skepticism to confusion to something harder, more focused. He tapped the screen, played an audio file. Derek's voice filled the small room, discussing staging an incident that would demonstrate my unfitness. Madison's voice joined his, uncertain but compliant. My granddaughter, whom I'd taught to braid her hair and bake sourdough bread, agreeing to corroborate her father's story. The doctor silenced the recording, rubbed his eyes beneath wire-rimmed glasses. He exhaled slowly through his nose, the sound heavy with implications he was only beginning to process. "I need to make some calls." He left, taking my phone with him. The door locked automatically behind him with a decisive click. I sank onto the bed, adrenaline draining from my system in a nauseating rush. My hands trembled violently. I pressed them against my thighs, willing them still. An hour crawled past, then 2. The IV bag emptied and began to beep, a shrill alarm that no one came to silence. I reached up, disconnected the line myself. A small bloom of blood appeared at the insertion point. I pressed my thumb against it, felt my pulse hammering beneath the skin. When the door finally opened again, a different woman entered. She wore a pantsuit instead of scrubs, carried a leather briefcase that looked expensive. Her gray hair was cut short, professional. She introduced herself as Hospital Administration, something or other Director of Patient Advocacy. The title didn't matter. What mattered was the tablet she turned toward me, displaying a police report filed that morning. Derek's face stared out from a booking photo. His expression was blank, shocked, the look of someone whose careful plan had collapsed catastrophically. Below his photo, charges scrolled past. Elder abuse, fraud, forgery, false imprisonment. The list went on, each line a vindication that felt more exhausting than triumphant. "Your attorney is here," the woman said, gesturing toward the hallway. "And your primary care physician? They're filing for immediate release." I nodded, found I couldn't speak. My throat had closed around something too large to swallow. The woman's hand settled briefly on my shoulder, squeezed once, then withdrew. She left the door open behind her. An invitation, a recognition that I'd never belonged behind it in the first place. Story block 1010. 6 months later, I stood at the farmer's market downtown, my fingers testing the firmness of peaches in a wooden crate. The vendor smiled at me, placed 2 extra in my bag without charge. The weight felt good in my hands, honest and real. Sunlight filtered through the white tent canopy above, casting everything in a warm glow that made the fruit look like it was lit from within. My apartment occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated building near the river. I'd signed the lease myself, written the check from an account Derek could never touch again. The walls were cream-colored, bare except for a single photograph I'd hung by the window. Me and 3 women from the support group, arms linked, standing in front of the courthouse. We met every Tuesday evening now. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just sat together, drinking coffee that one of us always remembered to bring. The stairs to my floor didn't whine me anymore. I'd been walking every morning, 5 blocks that turned into 10, then 15. My legs had remembered their strength, muscle memory that predation couldn't fully erase. I pushed through my door, set the peaches on the counter beside a vase of fresh sunflowers. Their bright faces turned toward the light, fearless and open. A knock came at 2 o'clock, exactly as scheduled. I checked the peephole, habit, caution that would probably never fully leave, then opened the door to find a woman in her 30s holding a young girl's hand. The child had Derek's dark hair, his sharp chin. My granddaughter. 8 years old, eyes uncertain but curious. "Hi, Grandma," she said softly. The word cracked something open in my chest. I stepped back, gestured them inside. The woman, Derek's ex-wife, Melissa, had reached out 3 weeks ago. She'd seen the news coverage, read the court documents, realized what Derek had done, realized what he'd told the children about me. We sat at my small dining table. I'd made lemonade, set out cookies on a plate that still had the price sticker on the bottom. Everything in this apartment was new, purchased by me, chosen by me. The girl, Emma, I reminded myself. Emma picked up a cookie but didn't eat it, just held it like a shield. "Your daddy told you things about me," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Things that scared you?" Emma nodded, finally took a small bite, chewed slowly, watching me. "Those things weren't true. He was angry, and he wanted to keep you away from me. But I'm not dangerous. I'm not crazy. I'm just your grandma." Melissa reached across the table, her hand stopping halfway, a bridge I could choose to cross. I covered her fingers with mine, felt the tremor in both our hands. She'd been trapped too, in different ways. Derek's charm had worked on her once, before she'd seen through it, gotten herself and the children out. Emma finished her cookie, reached for another. The tension in her small shoulders began to ease. I showed her the sunflowers, let her touch the velvet petals. We moved to the window where I pointed out the river below, the boats moving slowly past. She pressed her nose against the glass, left a smudge I wouldn't wipe away. "Can I come back?" Emma asked, turning to look up at me. "Every Sunday," I said, "if you want to." "I want to." After they left, I stood at the window for a long time. The river moved steadily southward, carrying away everything that tried to hold it back. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, gray hair loose around my shoulders, face lined but peaceful. 64 years old. 64 years of surviving, adapting, enduring, and now, finally, living. The support group had given me tools. The therapist had given me language. The lawyer had given me justice. But this apartment, this life I'd built from nothing in 6 months, this I'd given myself. The phone on my counter buzzed, a text from Melissa. "Thank you. Emma talked about you the whole drive home." I typed back, "Sunday, 2 o'clock." Then I walked to the bedroom, where my laptop sat open on a small desk I'd assembled myself, following instructions that tested my patience, but proved I could still learn new things. I'd started writing everything down: the gaslighting, the isolation, the systematic dismantling of my autonomy. Other women needed to know the signs, needed to understand that elder abuse could happen slowly, sweetly, by the hands of someone who claimed to love you. The cursor blinked on a blank page. I placed my fingers on the keys, felt their familiar resistance, then began to type. Words flowed faster than I expected, each sentence a reclamation, each paragraph a testimony. The afternoon light shifted across my desk, turning everything golden, and I wrote until my hands ached in a good way. The kind of pain that comes from building instead of breaking. That evening, I heated soup on my own stove, ate at my own table, washed my own dishes. Simple acts that felt revolutionary. When darkness settled over the city, I stood on my small balcony, breathing in the spring air. Somewhere out there, Derek sat in a cell, facing consequences he'd never imagined would catch him. The thought brought no satisfaction, no triumph. Just a quiet settling, like dust after demolition. The woman I'd been 6 months ago wouldn't recognize me now. The woman I'd be 6 months from now would surprise me further. That was the gift of survival. The discovery that you contained more versions of yourself than anyone else's story about you could hold. I went inside, locked the door, left the windows open to let the night sounds drift through. Somewhere, a dog barked. A car horn echoed off buildings. The city breathed around me, indifferent and alive. I climbed into my bed, mine purchased with money from the account Derek's lawyer had been forced to restore, and closed my eyes on a day that had been completely, unremarkably, beautifully ordinary. Tomorrow, Emma would be in school. Melissa would be at work. The support group wouldn't meet. But I would wake up in this apartment, make coffee in my kitchen, walk to the river and back. The routine held me like arms I could trust, steady and sure, asking nothing but my presence. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.